Bishop to g5. I said into the microphone. Bishop takes pawn. Check. There was a faint electric crackle over the headset as Donovan considered his next move. We were miles apart, separated by a heavy snowstorm that left the outside world in a blur of white fuzz. In my mind, I could still see him squirming in his computer chair, could picture his lips gently moving as he whispered to himself his next move.
King to d7.
Donovan replied. Can't. Queen at a4. You'll put yourself in check. A faint groan escaped through the headphones. Donovan had been operating on maybe 3 hours of sleep. His head wasn't in the game. The nightmares were getting to him, getting to all of us in their own way, but I was used to little sleep. Before I started working at the United States Remote Research Station, Outpost Delta, I lived with my older brother and his girlfriend. They had a 2-year-old and a newborn. Sleep was a luxury that I hadn't experienced for about 3 years running.
Fine,
Donovan said defiantly.
King to c8.
Knight to e7. Check. Again.
Emma, you think I don't see what you're doing?
Please enlighten me. I had to stifle the laughter from my voice. What am I doing?
Trying to force me into the corner.
Donovan returned.
You're lucky I don't have my queen anymore. Your king is wide open.
You should probably do something about that once you're not in check.
Yeah, real funny. Keep laughing.
He didn't move for a while, and when he did, there was a growl in his voice.
King to b8.
You're getting awfully close to that corner, my friend.
Why couldn't we have just played Guess Who like I wanted?
Because we've played Guess Who almost 100 times by now, and I'm sick of it.
But I hate chess. I actually hate it.
You just don't have the patience for it. In the year we'd known each other, that was the first thing I came to find out about him. The second was that he was an immense cinephile. When he wasn't wasting his time playing board games with me or working, he was on the couch watching a movie with a bag of popcorn in his lap.
You know what I miss?
He said. Papa John's pizza and Netflix?
Come on, I mean who doesn't?
We laughed about that.
I miss RuneScape.
Never got into it. My brother did for a while.
Let me tell you, it's a lot more fun than chess.
You're only saying that because you're losing. Before he could respond, another voice intercepted our conversation.
Have either of you talked to Edford lately?
It was Maya from Cabin G. We were all part of a research team observing odd phenomenon in Antarctica. Recent tremors and unusual climate habits. Harsh storms. At least 2 or 3 occurrences a week followed by hot days. Not necessarily hot in the normal sense, but relatively. It was warmer in the Arctic than it should have been. No, I don't think so. I double-checked the daily log beside my computer rig. He hasn't been on the public channel since this morning.
Done?
Maya asked.
A quick call on a private channel around 2 or 3.
He said.
Nothing important. Just wanted to see if anyone needed more supplies before he sends the registry to the company. Why? What's up? He got a hold of me about an hour ago. A little early for a booty call, don't you think?
The airwaves went silent aside from the static. I clamped my hand over my mouth to keep from laughing.
Sorry, not funny,
Donovan said, but his tone implied otherwise.
Seriously though, what's up? Nothing,
she said.
I just can't get a hold of him. He's probably taking a nap. Hard to keep a normal sleep schedule out here.
He wasn't wrong. The nights felt endless and the daytime was fleeting at best. Perpetual darkness around the clock. The increase in storms weren't helping either. It was hard to get out from under the covers when you were constantly bombarded by the cold. Our cabins had heating systems, but it just wasn't the same. Wasn't as cozy or safe as being beneath the blankets the company provided us with. Some days, you know the type, I didn't get out of my pajamas. On those mornings, I wouldn't even bother with a cup of coffee. Instead, I'd just make some hot chocolate, curl up in my computer chair with a blanket draped across my shoulders, and try not to fall asleep. It was especially difficult during the off-season. The rest of our colleagues were airlifted home for the holidays. The 4 of us volunteered to stay behind as the skeleton crew, keep up with the research and monitoring until the new year passed. The others were scheduled to return January 6th. Then we would get transported back home for about a week and a half to visit our relatives or do whatever we wanted. Not a bad trade-off considering the extra pay, time and a half for the weekdays, double time for the weekends.
I don't know,
Maya said softly. Her voice was a faint whisper against the wall of static from the storm.
Something doesn't feel right.
What did he last say to you? I asked.
He thought someone was knocking on his door. Bullshit.
Donovan cut in.
No, he did. I'm not saying he didn't, but that's impossible. There's no one else out here but us. Guy just needs to get more sleep.
Again, he wasn't wrong, but to get more sleep implied getting any sleep to begin with.
That's not all.
Maya continued.
He checked outside his front door and found footprints in the snow. Thought he saw someone out there too.
I swiveled in my chair, turning to access the navigational radar to the left of my computer. The display showed a circular grid with all the cabins pre-rendered into the system. When we had a full team, there would have been 26 colored dots on the screen, one at every cabin. Instead, there were only 4 available. One at cabin C, Donovan, another at cabin J, that was me, and a third at cabin Y, Maya. Edford was supposed to be at cabin R, but his transmitter was casting a signal about 2 miles north of cabin M. What the hell? I whispered, restarting the system in hopes that it might recalibrate. It had done this before, almost 2 months ago. There was an interference of some kind that set all of our equipment on the fritz. GPS kept scattering our transmitters, lights were going on and off, communications were down for half the cabins. Everything was a mess. Oscar from cabin D even had his power go out. Luckily, the backup generator kicked in long enough until Rita from cabin L got over there to perform some much needed maintenance on his fuse box. Blown circuit, corroded wires, whole thing had to be replaced. It was a bad time for Donovan. The company couldn't send replacement parts for almost a week, so he and Oscar had to share a living space for a little while. The cabins are about the size of a studio apartment, maybe slightly bigger. As you might imagine, cramped spaces aren't an ideal environment for multiple people, and you can't exactly complain about the other person without being overheard. After the fact, they were good sports about it. Oscar requested a care package during a supply order, chocolate-covered cherries, a variety pack of chips, and a whole assortment of other goodies that he sent Donovan's way. In return, Donovan ordered some books, movies, and video games for Oscar's 3DS. Eventually, the radar came back online. The dots remained the same. Edford's transmitter still put him out by cabin M, located in the middle of nowhere. Hey Maya, I spoke into the mic. Did Edford say anything else to you?
No,
she said.
I told him they were probably his footprints from last night or something. Told him that there's no one out here but us.
I checked the radar. Looks like he's out by Henry's place.
What the hell is he doing out there?
Donovan remarked. No clue, I said. You guys keep trying his handheld. I'll take the snowcat out to him and see what's going on. If you manage to get a hold of him, radio me. The cabins were each located about a mile apart from each other. The distance could vary depending on the terrain. A lengthy distance on foot, but a quick trip for the plow. Of course, that was assuming the weather would be forgiving. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Snow came down in curtains, pelting the windshield with bits of ice sticking to its surface. I turned the wipers on, but there was only so much they could do in a storm. It took me about half an hour to get there. Even when I arrived, I couldn't be sure if Edford was actually present. Everything was white, and the snow flurries were funneling in a conical pattern, spinning around me until up was down and left was right. I pulled the hood of my coat over my head and anchored myself to the snowcat with climbing rope, thick and durable, a reel almost 100 yards in length, enough to travel the span of a football field. It might sound dumb, but in an environment like that, it doesn't take much to get lost. And with the low temps, you can't be exposed to the cold for more than maybe 10 to 20 minutes without facing serious repercussions. I had to wonder how long Edford had been out there, how long he'd been exposed. I checked the compass I kept in my coat pocket and wandered out into the storm heading northeast. Every analyst was equipped with proper gear for outdoor travel, boots, an isolated coat and pants, gloves, goggles, and a face mask. Still, the cold was unbearable. Felt like my skin was on fire, and I'd only been out there for a few minutes. I called out to Edford, but there was no response. The howl of the wind was too ferocious, too powerful. Every word was swallowed by it, suppressed into a muffled whisper. I got lucky enough. Edford had left his snowcat's headlights on, and through the mist, I followed the pair of yellow beams until I stood before the mechanical beast. The windows were frosted over, and the exterior was coated in snow. I pulled on the handle and threw the driver's side door open. It was empty, but the interior lights were still on. I could hear Donovan's and Mia's voices coming in over the radio.
Houston to Edford. You there, Edford?
Donovan said.
Do you read me, Space Cadet? Ed?
Came Mia.
Can you hear me?
I moved to answer their calls. But then, out the other window, I saw a silhouette against the white backdrop of the blizzard. I leapt from the snowcat and sprinted towards the shadow. My boots were heavy and awkward. The insulated padding for the coat and pants didn't allow much in the way of mobility. It was like trying to walk in one of those inflatable Halloween costumes, constantly stumbling with every step. Eventually, after waddling the last 10 or so feet, I had reached him. He stood still as a corpse, staring down at the ground. He was dressed in gear similar to mine, his own colored a shade of orange. But after so long in the storm, it had all been frosted white, an anatomically correct snowman. Usually, you can tell when a person is breathing because of the fog around their mouth, but there was no mist with Edford, no indication of life until I grabbed his shoulder. Then, he turned towards me, his face concealed beneath a pair of goggles in a thick balaclava. "Come on!" I yelled. "You're going to freeze to death out here." Somehow, in spite of the wind or the sound of my beating heart, I heard Edford speak, a frail, breathless whisper. I was here. The wind ripped at my jacket, pulled at the length of rope connecting me to the plow. "Ed," I begged, "we have to go." This time, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me, a blank look in his eyes. "Ed," I yelled. "Never mind, screw it." We didn't have time to stand around talking. Every second out there was another second closer to hypothermia. I pulled him away, back towards my snowcat. Edward's feet stumbled against the ground, somewhat walking, but mostly dragging. I forced them into the passenger seat of my plow and unhooked myself from the anchor rope. With the click of a button, it retracted onto the reel. Climbing into the passenger seat, I closed the door and cranked the heat as high as it would go. I was exhausted, felt as if I'd just finished a marathon. Really, we traveled less than a mile. I yanked the goggles off my head and wiped the sweat and tears away before taking hold of the control levers. Then we started for my cabin. Along the way, I radioed the others to let them know what happened.
"Is he alright?"
Maya asked.
"What the hell was he doing?"
Said Donovan. "I've got him, safe and sound. That's all that matters right now," I replied. "I'll get back to you once we're at the cabin." Then, I turned off the radio to focus on the drive. The storm was picking up, smearing the landscape into a swirl of white. Antarctica could be a beautiful place if you ignored the cold. Glittering stretches of open terrain, an endless sky that sometimes was blue as the ocean or red as a fire. Pink in the early morning, maybe a shade of purple late at night with soft tinges of vibrant green. But most of the time, especially in the winter months, it was black, dark as the bottom of the ocean. In that moment, I felt a sense of nostalgia for my first week at the research station, long before I had become inured to the boredom and treacherous nature of the Arctic. In a strange way, perhaps even in a nonsensical, inexplicable way, I had felt like an astronaut, as if I were exploring what few had seen before. A lone life form adrift in the barren void of space. Special, not because of who I was or what I could do, but because of what I was in relation to my environment. An odd entity that existed somewhere it wasn't meant to be. A flower in the desert, a heartbeat amongst the dead. That feeling quickly abandoned me during my second or third week. My sense of awe had been combated by the long hours of nothing, trapped inside my cabin for hours on end. My distaste for the Arctic, for the cold and the snow, came with relative ease. "Where are we?" Edford asked. "We're heading back to my cabin." He reached up and pulled the fur-lined hood from his head, peeled the goggles from his eyes, tucked the balaclava down around his neck. His cheeks were red, his lips chapped. Edford was a handsome man in his early 30s, tan skin that had taken a softer tone from his time in the north, time spent away from the sunlight. A hard jawline with cheeks stippled by the makings of a beard. Thick, tangled hair sat on his head, brown as oak wood, drenched from sweat and snow into a darker shade than usual. The thing I'd noticed about Edford when we first met were his eyes, glacial blue and intense, the kind that were easy to get lost in if you weren't careful. Always watching, observing, assessing every minute detail. We sometimes joked that he was a reptile because we never saw him blink. And at first, it might seem disquieting, off-putting to the average person, but you quickly adjusted to it, to him, because beneath that severity, Beneath that intense gaze was a profound warmth, kindness, selflessness, intellect that went beyond amassed knowledge to a deep, unfathomable grasp of empathy, of emotions and compassion. If it weren't already apparent, I admired Edford, found his gentleness, his genuine nature, commendable, especially during a period of time when society's norm did not always condone such behaviors. Furtively though, I was also envious of him, jealous to a caustic degree. He had somehow figured out the secret to happiness, had discovered the path to not only fulfillment, but a level of content that I would never achieve, no matter how great my aspirations or achievements. To put it simply, I woke up every morning intent on working to earn my paycheck, like everybody else. Edford, though, awoke with the sole purpose of enlightening himself. No grandiose expectations, no incessant grind in search of monetary success. He lived and breathed for the sole purpose of experience, to do the best he could, and at the end of the day, properly acknowledge his efforts regardless of the results. Maybe that's why I had been so surprised to hear Edford say, "You should have left me out there." What? You should have left me on the ice, out in the storm. You would have froze. I'm surprised you're still alive, Ed. You'll be lucky if you don't contract anything serious. I'm already sick. Probably because you were standing in the middle of a snowstorm. What in God's name were you thinking? Edford turns towards me then, that faraway look in his eyes. There was someone out there. You're imagining things. There's no one out here but us. They're out there. No one is out there. The company would have told us if they were bringing anyone in, and as far as I'm aware, the next research station is almost 30 miles away. The cold was making me irritable. I wanted nothing more than to get back, take a warm bath, and drink some hot chocolate. Maybe play another game of chess with Donovan if he was willing to lose again, or listen to music while watching the snow fall. I was an avid fan of Low Roar. Their music was oddly redolent of the Arctic, morbidly beautiful, haunting and surreal. I exhaled my grievances. It's just us, Ed. He didn't seem convinced, but he said nothing more of the matter and leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. I've got a headache. We'll get you some aspirin when we get back. Gently, he massaged his temples as if to work the kinks from his brain. I hate it when people called me by the wrong name, but Edford wasn't in a state of mind to be scolded or reprimanded. I'll keep you overnight to monitor your status, I said. And assuming you haven't developed hypothermia by then, I'll take you back home in the morning. Maybe Donovan will help me retrieve your snowcat at some point. Edford showed no interest in the current subject and instead said, I had a dream about you last night. I scoffed. For both our sakes, don't tell Maya that. You were dancing at the center of the sun. Edford continued. I think you were laughing, even as the inferno swallowed you whole. You looked as if you were laughing. I blinked. The silence between us swelled, combated only by the sound of the wind as it thrashed the metal exterior of the snowcat. Maybe we should just let this be a time of silent reflection, I suggested. Take a moment to really think before we speak. Surprisingly, this made Edford laugh, a subtle, gradual thing that soon filled the inner cabin of the snowcat. If nothing else, he said, you're funnier than me. I shook my head in disbelief. Thanks. Glad to see the cabin fever hasn't completely turned you mad. Again, he croaked with laughter, a small humored chuckle that sat in his throat like the call of a toad. Humor is a good trait to possess, he told me. From what I have surmised, the general population appreciates good humor over almost anything else. They find it charismatic, endearing. The cold had corroded his brain, left him in a detached state, trying to further distance himself from the trauma he'd endured, from the realization that he had faced the distinct possibility of death not 20 minutes prior. I wasn't going to burst that bubble, wasn't going to ruin his method of coping. Simply, I told him, Ed, I think that is a very astute conclusion. This seemed to invoke some semblance of joy within him, a hint of pride for his meager assessment, and we were able to finish the remainder of our drive in peace. When we finally reached my cabin, I killed the snowcat's engine and climbed out from the cab. I lagged behind, allowing Edford to pass me and enter the cabin first, convinced that he might try to run away if I weren't there to block him. But now that I was with him, that he was no longer alone with his thoughts, he seemed cooperative, compliant, more so than usual. Edford was the unofficial leader of our little group, the spokesman for the skeleton crew. He ordered our supplies and reported to the company whenever they reached out, which wasn't often since most back at headquarters were away for the holiday. He didn't have any real authority, not like our actual superiors. He couldn't order us about or terminate our positions or anything like that. But he'd been taking on some of the responsibilities the rest of us wished to avoid, and for that, we were all grateful. Maybe that had been affecting him. The surmounted pressure and additional stress, coupled with the inevitable madness provoked by isolation, by a lack of sunlight and exercise. I would have asked him about it, not that he necessarily would have admitted this, but I was bone cold and exhausted. I didn't want to have a serious conversation then. Didn't want to deal with the burden. I just wanted to call it a night and relax, handle it in the morning after I had some rest, or about as close to rest as I could get. So, instead of talking, I ran a hot shower and let Edford wash up first. I threw his clothes into the laundry and started cooking tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner. Then I radioed the others to give them an update. They had more questions than I had answers. I told them what little I knew and promised to give any updates if I found out more. An empty promise. Edford was an adult, fully capable of making his own choices. If he wanted to talk, I was more than willing to listen. But in my mind, the last thing I would have wanted at a time like this was someone else poking and prodding, dissecting my every thought and decision as if I were no more than a hapless child. That didn't mean I wasn't going to keep an eye on him. He was in my cabin, and therefore under my supervision. Until I felt comfortable enough with his current state of well-being, I wasn't going to let him leave. Some people might think I was being completely ignorant or stupid, and maybe I was to some degree. But I would tell those people you weren't there. You don't know Edford like I do. Not that we're exactly close, but we've all been working together for the better part of a year, forced to spend almost every day within close proximity. It's not like we just clocked out at the end of the workday. Not like we could go to the bar on the weekends. If we wanted to socialize, it was with each other. If we wanted to play games or share a drink or have a movie night, there were only so many people we could do that with. Friendship or not, we were victims of circumstance, animals sharing the same exhibit. You either learned to appreciate the company of the other 25 individuals around you, or you spent all your time locked inside your cabin, slowly losing your mind. At this point, I'd had more conversations with Edford or Donovan or Maya or any of the other 23 analysts than I'd had with my actual friends, possibly even certain members of my family. We were more than familiar with each other. Edford was whimsical, but he wasn't an idiot. He wasn't crazy or insane or anything like that. He was fully self-aware, more cognizant than 90% of the people I'd encountered throughout my life. And from what I could tell, he didn't seem depressed, wasn't displaying negative behavior to lead me to suspect that he had gone out into the storm with the intention of dying. Still, despite my rationality, he had gone out there for a reason. There was an intention. I don't know. He had admitted between bites of his grilled cheese. About half of his tomato soup still remained, wafting little streams of mist into the air. I really thought someone was out there. I would have put all my money on it, every last dollar. And your first instinct was to go after them? I said. I didn't want them to freeze. He took another bite and chewed. I mean, didn't you do the same thing for me? That's different. I was almost certain you were out there. The transmitter even said so. I guess. But you went out there anyway. Alright, Ed. You've convinced me. Next time I notice you're miles away from your cabin in the middle of a snowstorm, I'll just leave you be. He laughed. That's not what I'm getting at. What are you getting at then? He contemplated this as he chewed, going back and forth between his sandwich and soup until neither remained. Human nature is self-destructive at its core, he finally said. It's practically intrinsic to do anything in our power to help another member of the species without any regard for our own well-being. I looked at him for a long time without saying anything, bemused by his statement, stupefied even. Then, when I did speak, I told him, You have severely misinterpreted human nature if that's what you believe. Oh? He seemed disappointed. Is that so? Enlighten me then. Gladly. I set my sandwich on the plate and leaned back in my seat. Have I ever told you about my father? He racked his brain for a memory that I already knew didn't exist. He was a good person, I explained. Served in the army for about 7.5 years. Honorably discharged due to mental concerns. Spent the rest of his life working minimum wage at a steel mill during the week. Nighttime security gigs at a bar downtown on the weekends. One day, I told him, he just dies. Heart failure. No warnings really. He was overweight and had been a smoker in his younger days. But other than that, fit as a fiddle. Okay. Well, we didn't have much money growing up. We were just above the poverty line. So, as you might imagine, we struggled to pay the funeral charges. It's expensive to properly dispose of a body, whether you cremate or bury. What did you do? We went to the VA, but they weren't going to cover it. Started a fundraiser online and in person. That helped. People donated, more than I expected. But at the end of the day, my family was stuck with a substantial bill. One that we are still paying, and it's been almost 3 years. Edford frowned. I'm not fully grasping. The point is, there are good people and bad people, two sides to every coin. But self-destructive in a selfless, sacrificial way? I don't think so. I pushed my plate away. My appetite had abandoned me. There's a reason humanity still exists while other species go extinct. We're hardwired for survival. Our sense of self-preservation is greater than our innate emotional response to the condition of others. You think people should have donated more until they had nothing left to give? Not at all. I don't hold a grudge. I don't have any grievances. Hell, I'd probably do the same thing they did in given circumstances. But if our empathy is as great as you want to believe, we wouldn't have struggled in the least to pay for my father's funeral. There wouldn't be homelessness or poverty or starving nations. Society wouldn't completely break at the first sight of a pandemic. But these things do exist. They happen because we're self-centered. Most of us at least. We worry about number 1 and hope number 2 or 3 or 4 never come knocking on our door in search of help. Then, why did you come out looking for me? I don't know. I just couldn't stand the idea of a coworker, a friend being out there, left alone like that. Maybe you don't give the human race enough credit. Or maybe I'm just an idiot lacking the necessity for self-preservation. I'm not entirely convinced. He smiled then, a gentle pull at the corner of his lips. I possess enough knowledge, sufficient memories and experience to know that humanity can be full of destruction and hostility. But there's still compassion out there. Enough altruism to deem worthwhile. It's a species worth protecting. One worth being part of. Don't you think? I scoffed. The conversation was absurd, but the question itself was beyond ridiculous. Not exactly what I expected from that night. It was commonplace to discuss politics or literature, pop culture and movies, weekend plans or outings with the family, the sanctity of humanity, the value of society. That just wasn't a popular topic. I think it's getting late, I said. I think we're too tired to be discussing ethical dilemmas or analyzing human nature. He put his hands up in surrender. Alright, fine. But let me ask you one last thing, and I'll leave it alone. What makes a person? What standards qualify someone as a human being? Easy, they know when to drop a conversation. I retrieved my dishes and carried them over to the sink. Looks like you've still got some learning to do. I guess so. We cleaned up after dinner. I washed and he dried. Then, while Edford looked through my collection of books and board games, I took a shower. The water was warm and thawed the cold from my body. Melted away the stress that had pulled my muscles taut. Helped clear the fuzz from my mind. When I stepped out, I found Edford waiting for me in the doorway of the bathroom. I didn't know how long he'd been there, but the moment caught us by surprise. What the hell are you doing? I remarked. He lifted his hand, holding up a book for me to see. A casual expression across his face as if I hadn't caught him watching me shower. It might sound stupid, but his nonchalance made any internal alarms go silent, as if it were a misunderstanding, bad timing kind of scenario. Can I borrow this? He asked, holding out my father's copy of Thomas Ligoti's The Conspiracy Against the Human Race on display. Sure. I waited a moment, towel wrapped around my body, before asking, You mind getting out so I can change? He frowned. A reddish hue flooded his cheeks. Right, sorry. Yeah, just one of those days. He backed out of the bathroom. Again, sorry, completely inappropriate of me. Once the door was closed, I swapped my towel for a pair of checkered pajama bottoms and a plain gray sweatshirt. Cotton polymer that was softer than any pillow or cloud in existence. The small things in life are sometimes the most fruitful. Little pleasures to make the rest no more than a distant memory. That greasy fast food takeout after a long day at work. That cup of cocoa after spending the morning shoveling your driveway. A tub of cookie dough ice cream after getting dumped by the only girl you ever loved. Brief moments of reprieve from reality. Distractions to keep your sanity intact. Comfort in the simplest form. When I came out of the bathroom, I found Edford sitting on the couch reading my father's book. He glanced at me and offered a soft smile. A strange way to clear the air, but for the life of me, I couldn't think of a better alternative. I'm sure one existed, but at the time, I was still in an awkward mindset of whether I should be upset, pissed, ashamed, or mortified. I'm going to put the kettle on, I said. You want a cup of tea? Tea? Crushed leaves and hot water. He chuckled. I know what tea is. He pondered a moment. Is it any good? You've never had tea before? No, yeah, I have. But what kind? I've got sleepy time vanilla, peppermint, and throat coat. I checked the cabinet. I've also got homebrew coffee and hot chocolate with marshmallows. The variety and choice seemed to confuse him. Is that an answer? Again, that warm, crooked smile. You know better than me. I'll let you decide. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the burner. Then I went to my rig to perform the nightly check-in. Maya was getting ready for bed. It seemed a little early, but lately she'd been laying in bed for hours on end, unable to fall asleep. Her theory was that if she lay down around 8 or 9 at night, she might be asleep by 10 or 11. Donovan was in the middle of a Studio Ghibli marathon. He'd been watching Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind when I radioed in. For those that don't know Donovan, the last thing you wanted to do was interrupt him during a movie. So I skipped the niceties and any attempt at conversation. Told him I would check back in the morning. I wanted to mention Edford, talk about the way he was acting, the things he'd been saying. But like with Donovan and Oscar, it was hard to broach the matter with him in the same room, listening to our conversation. After recording temperatures, weather conditions, and seismic activity, I muted my systems and grabbed the kettle from the stove. I poured a cup of Sleepy Time vanilla for myself and throat coat for Edford. When I came into the living room, Edford dog-eared his current page and looked up at me. Can I ask you something? Depends, I said. What's it about? Your father. You can ask, but I can't promise to give an answer. Fair enough, all things considered. I set a cup of throat coat on the coffee table in front of him and took a seat in my desk chair at the other end of the room. Alright, shoot, I said. Shoot? Figure of speech, Ed. Never knew you to be so literal. He tittered and shrugged helplessly. Like I said, weird day. Feeling a bit off, like I've just awoken from a dream. I know that feeling, sort of like deja vu. His brow knitted with uncertainty. I guess so, yeah. He set the book on the cushion beside him and took his mug by the handle, lifting it to his lips. Wait a minute, that's... But he was already gulping it down. Wisps of steam masked his face as he emptied the mug. Then, he set it back on the coffee table and exhaled. Never mind, I muttered. Guess you don't really need taste buds anyway. I blew on my cocoa before taking a drink. I don't know how he didn't react because I practically scorched the interior of my mouth with just one sip. Anyways, I said, stifling a yelp. You had a question about my father? Right, I was going to ask if you missed him. Of course, it'd be a crime not to. Would it? Another figure of speech, Ed. Seriously, what's going on with you? No, I understand. I just mean, what if I didn't miss my own father? I wasn't aware your father had passed. He pursed his lips, forming a firm line across his mouth. Both of my parents. Actually, they died in a car accident. Couldn't help the shocked expression on my face. Edford was so vibrant and optimistic. Hard to imagine he had ever experienced any serious trauma. But that's just the way some people coped. Turn to the positive and leave the past behind. Let your shadow follow at your heels instead of plaguing your mind. I don't really feel much of anything about their deaths, he confessed. Shouldn't I though? Well, when did it happen? I was a child. They were coming back from a date, and I was stuck at home with the babysitter, a young neighbor girl from across the hall. I remember hearing the police sirens from down the road. He recalled. When I looked out the window, I could see the lights flashing in the distance. I felt helpless, trapped. I don't know how I knew it was them. I just did. But now, I don't feel anything. It's like I'm watching that moment on TV, like it was someone else's life. I'm not a psychologist, but it sounds like you're still in shock. He shook his head. No, I remember being in shock at the time. I don't know what this is. You can be in shock more than once. Some realities take years to set in. It's not like you experience it once and it's done. These things come in waves. Some days, I paused, wondering if this was something I wanted to share with him. Something I wanted to share with anybody. Some days, I get up and get out of bed like anybody else. I feel fine, normal, just go through the motions and that's that. But then there are days when I might hear a certain song or watch a certain movie or read a certain book and it feels like I've lost my father for the first time again. Like I'm back in that moment when my brother called to tell me. Edford stared at me wide-eyed and completely enthralled, as if we were sharing ghost stories around the campfire. It comes and goes, I finished. You don't ever stop grieving. You just learn to carry that weight, to manage it so that it doesn't crush you. What if you could forget? He asked. Lose those memories, would you? That was a tough question. Well, I suppose the question itself wasn't harder than any other question, but the answer was complicated, difficult to put into words, to explain outside of just feeling it. I'm not sure, honestly, I said. I mean, that's why people smoke or drink or whatever, because they want to distract themselves, want to forget their pain. But I don't think you can, not without causing more issues for yourself. You'll have to expound on that a little more for me. Life isn't a steak, I explained. You can't just cut away the fatty bits. I wish you could, but I suppose some people really do try. But in my experience, it just doesn't work like that. It's a package deal. You get the good with the bad. Trying to eliminate that, to cut out the parts you don't like, it'll hurt you as a person. It would completely erase any tolerance for pain and leave you with unrealistic expectations. You wouldn't really be yourself if you removed the memories you didn't want. To suffer is a better alternative? To suffer is to be human, just like with love and hate, joy and anger. We have to experience all those emotions at some point or another. Otherwise, we become blind to reality. He seemed enthralled by this notion, completely absorbed by the topic at hand. But I get where you're coming from, I admitted. I've been there, so overwhelmed by your grief that you almost find yourself wishing you don't exist, that you weren't real because then you wouldn't have to feel anything at all. All that heartbreak, all that confusion and madness just fades away if you weren't there to indulge it. It becomes illusory. Edford leaned back, resting his chin in between his forefinger and thumb. Interesting. It's been a long day, I told him. Let's just call it an early night. Try to get some sleep and clear our heads. Silently, he nodded. I retrieved an extra set of pillows and blankets from the closet. I offered to sleep on the couch, but Edford refused. He had already taken the better half of my day with his antics. He didn't want to put me out any further by taking my bed. I was too tired to argue. I turned out the lights and climbed beneath the covers. It took me a while to fall asleep, partially because my brain wouldn't shut down. That's been a problem since childhood. Even when my body was on the brink of collapse, my mind stayed active. But also, I wanted to wait until Edford had fallen asleep. Not that he would have done anything, not that I didn't feel safe around him, but there was just this feeling I had. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't allow myself to go to bed until I knew he was asleep first. That eventually came when I heard his soft snores sneaking through the dark. Then, and only then, did I close my eyes and relax. It probably comes as to no surprise that I dreamt of my father that night. I was outside, caught in the middle of an ice storm. There was nothing around me for miles. Empty fields laden with snow. Endless hills rolling in the distance like the gentle peaks of ebbing ocean waves. The sky was pitch black. No sun, no moon, no stars, just a blank void of darkness. I could hear my father calling out to me. It had been so long since I heard his voice, but even then I could tell it wasn't him. It was a guttural sound, sharp and grating, but inexplicably I was convinced that it was my father. The way that dream logic makes no rational sense, but you accept it as fact anyways. I followed the voice through the storm until it came from directly beneath me. Then I fell to my knees and started digging. I didn't have a shovel or gloves or any equipment, so I dug with my bare hands. My fingers went from red to pale blue. My muscles ached and burned. But I kept digging, pushing away mound after mound of snow. I found his corpse buried beneath a thick wall of ice, arms raised and hands poised as if trying to claw his way out. I blinked, and my father was replaced by Edford. I blinked again, and this time it was Donovan, short black hair and a thin mustache above his upper lip, skin the color of milk. Then it was Myuu, long auburn red hair and soft green eyes, mouth partially open as if frozen mid-scream. Lifting my fist, I pounded on the ice, cracking the first layer with relative ease, but struggling to break through anything deeper than that. The wind picked up. Snow pelted me at an incredible speed, dragging across my flesh like the edge of a razor blade. When I blinked again, Myuu was gone. Instead, it was me beneath the ice, a reflection interspersed by a spiderweb of cracks. I awoke with a lump in my throat, wanting to scream but unable. My lips were locked together. I was paralyzed. At my bedside, Edford loomed over me. He had a blank gaze in his eyes, looking without seeing, a lantern absent of light. "I am here," he said. His body began to tremble, and a crack split across his face. Blood seeped from the wound, but as it dripped towards the ceiling, I realized it wasn't blood. It was too dark, too viscous. Oddly, it reminded me of a lava lamp I had when I was a kid. The fake magma clumps slowly rising to the top, breaking apart and reforming into other clusters. Disobeying the laws of gravity and physics, the substance made contact with the ceiling, spreading across it in a pool of black sludge with tiny pinpricks of white fuzz. An entire solar system contained inside one body. "I was there," Edford croaked. "But now I am here. Yet, I am still there. Help me. Release me from this prison." The crack widened with a bone-splitting snap. Edford's head pulled apart, unleashing a tsunami of black mucus. Hard, gnarled branches protruded from within his skull, a coral reef spotted by fungus and an infestation of worm-like creatures. I watched in awe as it blossomed across the room, unfurling until its roots touched either wall. "I can't take it," Edford said. "Release me, please, take me out." Slowly, he lifted his hand towards me. His fingers brushed my cheek. They burned against my skin. Edford, or the thing that looked like Edford, began to weep. "I've been here long enough. Make it stop. Let me out." This time, when I woke up, I was greeted with a faint stream of light coming through the window. I pulled it upright in bed, drenched in sweat and shivering. My heart pounded inside my chest. I looked around the room, but it was empty. No black goo, no fungus, no worms, no Edford. The couch had been abandoned, blankets cast to the floor. Deathly afraid, I cautiously placed one foot on the ground. A moment passed before I had the courage to pull myself out of bed, to creep through the cabin as if every shadow might come alive and start attacking me. The kitchen was empty. The bathroom was empty. The shower was empty. It was just me, alone in that dimly lit cabin, accompanied by a hissing silence as the wind whirled outside. Then, the quiet broke as a voice crackled in over the headset. I went to the desk and booted up the rest of my rig.
"Emma, you there?"
Donovan asked.
"Emma, answer the damn radio."
"Yeah, I read you. What's going on?"
"I've been trying to reach you for the last hour."
"I was sleeping. What's up?"
"Is Ed with you?"
"No, I don't think so."
"You're not sure?"
"I just woke up," I reminded him. "But the cabin is empty."
"Did you check outside?"
I lifted the curtain of the nearest window. With the current storm, I couldn't make out much, but the driveway was vacant. My snowcat was missing. A set of treads led away from my cabin, heading northeast. Son of a bitch. He's gone, I told Donovan. He took my plow.
Shit, thought as much.
There was a hiss of static interspersed with his words.
Maya radioed me earlier, said she couldn't sleep, so she checked the monitors to keep herself occupied and noticed Edford's transmitter was on the move.
I turned to the radar. Edford's dot had come to a standstill in the exact location I found him yesterday. Maya's dot, though, was gradually shifting towards him, and Donovan's was en route to me.
Look, I'll be there in a few minutes,
he said.
Get your gear on and be ready. I don't know what the hell he's trying to pull, but we're gonna go get him.
Don, I don't know.
What? Ma? What did... Fucking interference.
The static was getting louder.
If you... Here. Get... Be there. Minutes.
I tried to respond, but the signal was gone. Every channel I tried was overrun with interference. I ran to the bathroom and grabbed my clothes from the dryer. I didn't bother changing out of pajamas. By the time I had my boots on, I could hear the engine of Donovan's snowcat growling outside. I grabbed my equipment bag from the closet and ran out the door. There was no time for greetings or small talk. I climbed into the passenger seat, shut the door, and we were off. He's lost it. He's actually lost his mind, Donovan said, teeth gritted, fingers strangling the steering levers. What the hell happened yesterday? Nothing. Bullshit. You don't just wander into a snowstorm. What did he say to you? Lots of stuff, but it's not like he told me he was going to do it again. Why do it in the first place? He thought he saw someone out there. Donovan jerked the controls to avoid a steep bank. There's no one out here besides us. That's what I told him. And what'd he say? Nothing. God damn it, Emma. I'm telling the truth. He didn't say anything. I tried to convince him. And? Obviously, he didn't believe me. No, that doesn't make any sense, Donovan said. Even if there were someone out here, they'd be dead by now. You can't survive 20 minutes in something like this, much less 12 hours. I don't think Ed's operating on logic for this one. Donovan muttered beneath his breath and steered us into a valley. It doesn't matter. Once we get him back, we're calling in for transport. He's clearly experiencing some sort of psychotic breakdown, and he needs more help than any of us can offer him. He's just confused. Looking for your car in the wrong parking spot is confused. Wandering into a blizzard in the middle of a tundra is... I don't know what that is. It's a death wish, I thought. The snowcat shook against the wind. Drifts of snow swept across the windshield in curtains of white. Furtively, I was relieved Edford had taken my transport. At least I didn't have to navigate the perils of the storm. Donovan was from Canada, spent most of his life in bad weather with beater cars and vehicles less equipped than the plow. I trusted him enough to get us there in one piece, more than I trusted myself. He was acting kind of strange last night, I eventually said when the storm had alleviated enough for the wipers to keep snow off the glass, when it didn't take every ounce of concentration for Donovan to maneuver the icy terrain. Didn't seem like he was fully there. What else did he say about this mystery person? Did he know them or think that he knew them? He never said, and I didn't ask. You didn't ask. He was clearly going through something. It didn't seem like a good time to be interrogating him. You should have told us. It's not like I could have without him overhearing it, I countered. Plus, I didn't think it was this bad. I didn't think he was going to do it again. People have bad days and do dumb shit all the time. Spur of the moment kind of decision making. I thought after a hot meal and a good night's sleep, he might bounce back, come to his senses. Clearly not. What else you got, Doctor? Are you really going to pin this on me? Donovan glanced at me from the corner of his eyes. There was a ferocity in his gaze that quickly cooled. No, he said. I'm sorry. I'm not pissed, and I'm not trying to be an asshole. I'm just freaked out and confused and tired of being... tired. More nightmares? All I have are nightmares or sleepless nights. It's getting old real fast, Em. Feel like I'm losing my mind too. But I'm at least sane enough not to abandon my cabin and look for someone who doesn't exist. Yeah, maybe. We found my snowcat parked about 5 feet from Edford's. His had amassed a pile of snow in the night, and mine was already starting to collect its fair share. You got an anchor line? Donovan asked. I forgot mine. Yeah, don't worry about it. I've got enough for the both of us. What else did you bring? I unzipped the bag and peered inside. Some provisions, a thermal blanket, binoculars, a flare gun, extra gloves, a climbing pick, and a medkit. Hopefully, we won't need any of it, but keep it on you just in case. way ahead of ya." We exited the snowcat and were hit by a wall of ice and snow. I anchored myself to the passenger door and then clipped Donovan to me. We walked across the field, heading north. If memory served correct, we'd find Edford about 15 or 20 yards from the snowcats. This time, he wasn't just standing there staring at his feet. He was digging with a metal-headed shovel from my cabin. Maya was maybe 3 feet away, watching in horror, mumbling soft pleas for him to stop. But Edford was a man possessed, so convinced that there was someone out here needing his attention, needing to be rescued. "Edford!" Donovan called over the rage of the storm. "Ed, enough! Come on, man, there's no one out here." Edford's only response was to keep digging, scooping and flinging piles of snow over his shoulder that were taken adrift by the wind. "Just put down the shovel and come with us," Donovan yelled. "You've entertained this madness for too long. You'll catch your death out here." There was a harsh crack as the shovel met ice. Then, instead of digging, Edford lifted the shovel and stabbed it into the ground, over and over and over, chipping away at the ice, trying to break through a layer that must have been a foot or two in width. Donovan got closer, and due to the constraints of the rope binding us, I too was dragged with him. "That's enough." Donovan's words succumbed to the howl of the storm. He stopped dead in his tracks at the crest of the hole, glaring down with a mixture of bewilderment and fear, like the first time you reconcile your own mortality, when you realize just how finite life really is. "What's wrong?" I asked, but Donovan wouldn't answer me, couldn't answer me. I inched forward, my boots crunching against the snow. Inside the hole, beneath the ice, was a shadow. A figure with mottled, pale blue flesh that must have stood 8 feet tall, if not taller. Its head was a knotting of branches around a jagged plate of what looked like bone. There were a dozen of tiny beady eyes staring back up at us. No mouth or nose or any structure that resembled a person. I couldn't even be sure that I was looking at its head or that those spots were its eyes. The human mind naturally makes comparisons and associations, puts things into a relative sense so as to further comprehend what cannot be understood. This thing, though, was not meant to be understood, too foreign to reconcile. Pulling around the creature was a viscous, black substance, the very same from my dream. Slowly, with every thrust of the shovel, cracks spread across the sheet of ice, its trenches growing deeper until that black substance was able to seep through. Then, as it wriggled its way free from the tomb, it began to lift into the air, flowing upward towards the sky. "I won't do it," Edford grunted as he brought the tip of the shovel down, threatening to snap the wooden shaft. "I've been under long enough." "Edford, stop!" Donovan said, weak with fear. "Stop digging. It's not fair," Edford exclaimed. "I don't deserve this." As the shovel lifted into the air, Donovan grabbed the top of the handle. A game of tug-of-war broke out between the two. But I don't think Edford realized he was playing. He was far too consumed to notice the disturbance. He just knew that he needed to keep digging. "Help me," Donovan said. Begrudgingly, I wrapped my hands around the length of the handle and planted my feet in the snow. Together, we started to pry the shovel away from his grasp. Then, in a fit of rage, Edford turned towards us with his lips peeled back in a snarl. "You can't stop me." He released the shovel. Donovan and I fell backward into the snow. By the time I got to my feet, Edford was out of the hole and upon us. He attacked Donovan first, ripping away at the protective goggles and sinking his teeth into Donovan's right eye. I tried to stop him, but Edford backhanded me with an unnatural strength, knocking me into the hole. I crashed against the ice with a dull thud. The cracks twisted and split around me. An onslaught of incoherent whispers snaked through my mind. It wasn't any language I'd heard before, but the very sound of it, the timbre of the voices, were like nails on a chalkboard. Steel stool against a sheet of metal, growing louder by the second until it felt as if my brain might rip itself apart. Images flooded my mind, an endless stretch of black. I could see the stars and asteroids, the fiery sinews of a boiling planet, galaxies devoid of life, devoid of anything and everything, darkness all around me, cold and suffocating, deathly silent. My only saving grace was the sound of Maya screaming, an ear-piercing screech that made the whispers fade just long enough for me to climb out of the hole. When I returned to the surface, Donovan was on the ground convulsing. He had his hand over his eye, an attempt to staunch the bleeding. Maya was on Edford's back, her arms wrapped around his throat. But this had no apparent effect. Her weight and motion were nothing to him. He stood straight as an arrow, still and calm as the night. A blank, faraway look in those once warm eyes. "I won't be ignored," Edford croaked. "I won't be forgotten. You understand, don't you?" Then, just as it had happened in my dream, his head split apart. A mass of darkness spewed from his skull, projecting its own miniature replication of a galaxy. With it came that coral reef of barnacle-covered branches, a pink sludge that, against all logic and reason, I knew was Edford's brain, reformed and reshaped into this foreign matter that coalesced with the black sludge orbiting his body. Maya's screams were silenced as the darkness swallowed her whole. One moment she was there, and the next there was no trace other than a glove that had been pulled off her hand during the struggle. She'd been absorbed and dissolved. Edford spasmed and ripped open his coat, tore away the shirt underneath. A seam cut vertically across his chest, a mouth with rows upon rows of teeth. At the center was a bright light, a swallowed star. I squinted and turned away, bringing my hand up to shield my eyes against its glow. "I have traveled across oceans of cosmos to be here." His voice reverberated like a perpetual echo carried across the hollow of a mountain range. "I have endured tidal waves of darkness and deterioration to find this. You will not take it away from me." Donovan, fueled by adrenaline and numbed by shock, rushed in and thrust my climbing pick into the center of Edford's chest. He yanked on the handle, tearing a gash that bled black as night. Edford seized him by the throat, squeezing so hard I could hear the bones snapping. Then, as Donovan's mouth opened to scream or maybe to inhale the breath that would not come, the flume of darkness funneled down his throat. There was no swelling, no noticeable inflation. It happened too fast. He just exploded, popped like a balloon. Bone and muscle and tissue splattered across the snow, painting it in shades of red. My instincts kicked in then, and I ran. I followed the rope back to the snowcat. But as I moved to climb into the driver's seat, there was a tug on the other part of the rope, the section that had once been attached to Donovan. I was pulled out of the snowcat, slowly dragged through the snow. Thinking quick, I unclipped myself and scrambled to my feet. I leapt into the plow and pushed the steering levers forward at full speed. The wipers fought against the snow that blanketed the windshield, but they couldn't clear the glass. I never saw him, but I felt the jolt as I ran Edford over, crushing his body beneath the treads. Then, beyond reasons of my own understanding, I stumbled out from the snowcat and rounded to the back storage compartments where we kept spare fuel canisters. I took the nearest one and tracked down Edford's body. As expected, it was still active. There was no mist to indicate breathing, but the black matter continued to writhe from his skull, coalescing around his broken, distorted body. He looked up at me through bloodshot eyes. "Don't." "I'm sorry," I whispered, unscrewing the cap and dousing the thing that was Edford in gasoline. I was acting on impulse, giving little thought or consideration to my choices. I can't say if I did the right thing, but at the time, it didn't matter. It felt like the right thing, the right choice. I found my bag and retrieved the flare gun from within. Then I took aim, my finger on the trigger. Slowly, as if it were a struggle, Edford lifted his fractured head from the snow to look at me. In place of words was a prolonged, guttural moan that echoed across the sky. I must have been half mad because it felt as if the entire world was shaking beneath my feet. I fired the flare and set his body ablaze. I stayed long enough to watch him succumb to the flames. The flash and darkness withered into ashes, stolen and scattered by the wind. In time, the fire began to wilt. Nothing could persist in the Arctic, not even a burning inferno. Retreating to the snowcat, I twisted the levers and started back towards my cabin. The trip was longer than I remembered, and there was a moment when I was sure I'd been lost. But through a break in the storm, I saw my cabin, saw my home. When I was back inside, I stripped from my gear and cranked the heat. Then I retrieved my headset to report to the company, but there was no response. Too much interference, too much static to get a message across. I thought about taking the snowcat to the next cabin over. The door would be locked, but I could get in if I broke the window. Maybe their system would still be active. Before I could follow through with this plan, I heard a voice in my head. A distant whisper from the recesses of my mind. slowly getting louder, its voice becoming less of a gargle and more like my own. It dawned on me then what this was, what had happened. A parasite that infects its host from the inside out. I can't say how long it's been here, or where it came from, but I know what it can do. At least, I have a semblance of understanding. I'd seen what it did to Edford, watched as it corrupted him within a matter of hours, saw the change in real time, whether I'd realized it or not. It left me wondering if the person I'd talked to the night prior was Edford or not. Maybe it was a mixture of the two, occurring at an awkward interval while one entity assimilated the other. The incubation period before the infection completely set in, and I was about to go through the very same thing. So I did what I thought was best. I went to my computer, opened a document, and began typing. I don't know if the radio will come back online, and this is my only means of warning the others. Hours have passed since that moment. I can feel it now, the voice warming its way through my brain, trying to make its thoughts my own. It's like a tickle at the base of my skull, like trying to perceive the differences between two photos that are almost identical, save a few minor changes. I know now that I won't make it out of this. I'll succumb to this thing by nightfall, losing any sense of self along the way. My only hope is that someone will recover this hard drive, that they'll read this, and against all plausibility, believe it to be true, that they'll know to abandon this place, mark it as uninhabitable. And if I'm lucky, if we're all lucky, no one else will ever come here. No one else will discover what lies beneath the ice. This thing, whatever it is, it's getting close. I'm forgetting moments, losing track of time. I don't want to become it, and I don't want it to become me either. There's only one choice left. This isn't an easy decision, but I have to do it. I've already prepared for it, and I just have to hope that during my next blackout, I'll eventually resurface long enough to pull it off. I've emptied the remaining gasoline cans outside my cabin, and I've got a bundle of flares waiting by the door. It seemed to work with Edford. I imagine it'll work with me as well. I hope they don't try to make my family try to identify my body. There won't be much of anything left to identify. Just some charred bones, maybe a flick of my hair. My family doesn't deserve to see that. I hope the company lies to them, tells them our expedition was a failure, that we were swallowed by the storm and froze to death, or that we starved. Something peaceful and humane, something that won't haunt them for the rest of their lives. I have to wonder though, if what I'm about to do will be considered an act of self-annihilation or not. It's still me technically, organically, but this thing is infecting my insides. It's taking me over, erasing every last trace of what makes me, me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't able to overcome it. Sorry that I couldn't defy this thing controlling me. I can only hope that no one else will have to go through this. That no one else will know this feeling, will know what it's like to lose yourself to a dominant parasite living within the gray matter of your brain. I wouldn't wish that on even my worst enemy. This is Emma of Cabin J from the United States Antarctica Research Outpost, signing off. If this message has been successful, you will never have heard about me or our operation. If I've failed, then the population has most likely been infected. It'll be hard to spot it at first, especially if this creature is clever and knows how to conceal itself. But trust me, the infection will spread. It'll pass from person to person, home to home, continent to continent, until no one is left untouched. Good luck, everyone. Stay safe. Stay alert. Stay alive. And whatever you do, don't go looking under the ice. It's not worth it. Just let it go.